I still remember the first time she knocked on my door, carrying a plate of freshly baked cookies like some character from an old TV show. Her smile was wide, too wide maybe, but at that moment I didn't think twice. We had just moved into the neighbourhood, and I was desperate to feel like we belonged somewhere again. My husband Mark was at work, and the kids were unpacking their boxes in their new rooms. And here she was, our neighbour, introducing herself with warmth and sweetness. "Welcome," she said, her voice smooth and pleasant, her eyes scanning me in a way I couldn't quite read. I brushed it off. I wanted to believe we were lucky, that this move was going to be the fresh start I'd prayed for. For weeks she seemed perfect. She would wave from her porch whenever I pulled into the driveway. And she always had something kind to say about my garden, even though I barely managed to keep the flowers alive. She complimented the kids, said they were polite and bright, and she even once told me how lucky I was to have a husband like Mark. At the time, those words felt like comfort. I had no idea they would echo later, in ways that would make my stomach turn. I let her into my house often. She'd bring over coffee, sometimes wine, and we would sit at my kitchen table while the sunlight streamed in, making everything look more peaceful than it really was. She listened to my stories about the chaos of raising 2 kids, about the arguments Mark and I had over money, about my fears that I wasn't doing enough as a wife or mother. She always listened with that same soft smile, nodding at the right times, her eyes glinting with something I should have noticed. I told myself it was just kindness. I told myself she was becoming a friend. Looking back, I realised she was studying me. Every detail I gave her was like ammunition I was handing over without realising it. She once said, "You should let me take the kids for an afternoon. Give yourself some time to breathe." At first I hesitated, but she seemed so trustworthy, so generous that eventually I agreed. The kids liked her too. She was fun, she had games and stories, and she seemed to genuinely enjoy their company. I thought she was a blessing. That was the mask she wore so well. There were small things that nagged at me, little comments she made that didn't sit right. Once, she mentioned how Mark seemed stressed lately, how maybe he needed a break too. Another time, she laughed and said, "If I had a husband like yours, I'd never let him out of my sight." I laughed awkwardly, not knowing what to say, brushing it off as a compliment. But when I replay those moments in my head now, I hear the sharpness beneath her words. I should have heard it then. The truth is, I was lonely. Moving meant leaving behind my family, my closest friends, the people who knew me inside and out. I was eager for connection, for someone to talk to, for someone to reassure me that I wasn't alone in this new chapter. She gave me that, or at least she made me believe she did. It's frightening how easily we can mistake poison for honey when we're starving for sweetness. I remember one morning, she showed up with coffee and donuts unannounced. She slipped into my kitchen like she belonged there, setting everything down with that same bright smile. Mark was in the shower, and she asked casually, "So, how are things between you two, really?" I laughed nervously, dodging the question. But somehow she always managed to circle back to Mark, his schedule, his habits, his moods. At first I thought she was just being conversational, but now I know she was gathering and waiting. And all the while she smiled to my face, making me believe she was on my side, while somewhere deep down she was sharpening the knife she'd eventually drive right into my family. The thing about trust is that once you hand it over, you don't really think about it again. I trusted her. I trusted that smile, the friendly tone, the way she always seemed to show up exactly when I needed a break. At first, it felt like fate had given me someone to lean on. But soon I realised she wasn't just stepping into my life. She was weaving herself into every part of it. She started with small favours, picking up milk when she went to the store, offering to drive my daughter to soccer practice when I was running late. She always made it seem like she was helping, like she was easing the weight off my shoulders. And honestly, I was grateful. I had no clue she was slowly making herself indispensable. Planting roots where they didn't belong. Mark seemed to like her too. He'd wave from the porch when she came by, and sometimes he'd join us for coffee. They'd laugh about the neighbourhood gossip or complain about traffic. I told myself it was harmless. After all, wasn't it good that our neighbour felt like part of the family? But there were moments, little flickers, that unsettled me. Like the way her eyes lingered on him when she thought I wasn't watching, or the way she seemed to know details about him I hadn't shared, like his favourite beer, or the kind of music he liked to listen to in the garage. I once asked Mark how she knew those things, and he shrugged, saying maybe it had come up in conversation. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe them both, but something in me shifted that day. I started noticing how often she brought him into our talks. She'd say things like, "Mark's such a hard worker. You're lucky he's so dedicated." Or, "He must be exhausted providing for all of you." At first it sounded like admiration, but later I realised it was more like a wedge, subtle but sharp. I still remember a night when Mark came home later than usual. He said he'd been stuck at work, but when I mentioned it to her the next day, she smiled strangely and said, "Oh, I thought I saw his car near the diner last night." The way she said it, so casual, so offhand, but with just enough weight to make me doubt him, was like a tiny seed planted in my mind. I tried to shake it off, but it grew. Every time Mark was late, every time his phone buzzed and he didn't pick up, her voice echoed in my head. I thought I saw his car. I began questioning him more, watching him closer, and that tension started eating at us. Arguments flared over nothing. I accused, he defended, and neither of us realised that she had already slipped between us, twisting the knife with every smile. The scariest part is that I confided in her, even about those fights. I told her how insecure I was feeling, how I didn't understand why Mark was pulling away. She'd nod sympathetically, telling me it was normal for couples to drift, but then she'd always add something that kept my doubts alive. "Just make sure you know where he really is," she once whispered, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. I laughed it off in the moment, but later, lying awake at night, her words replayed until I couldn't sleep. That's when I realised she wasn't just a neighbour anymore. She was in my head. And worse, she was starting to win. It's almost embarrassing to admit how much space she took up in my mind without me realising it. At first I thought she was just a friend, a kind woman trying to help me adjust to a new neighbourhood. But soon it felt like she was everywhere. If I was in the backyard, she'd appear over the fence with some casual comment. If I went to the store, somehow she'd be there too, waving from the next aisle. It was like she knew my schedule better than I did. I remember one Saturday morning, Mark was fixing something in the garage, and she walked over with lemonade for both of us. She handed me a glass, but then drifted toward him, asking what he was working on. I watched from the porch as they laughed together, and for the first time I felt something ugly rise up inside me. Jealousy, suspicion, dread. Like I was witnessing the start of something I couldn't control. Later, when I mentioned it to Mark, he rolled his eyes. "She's just being neighbourly," he said, almost annoyed, like I was making a problem out of nothing. And maybe I was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she enjoyed making me uneasy. She had this way of saying things that seemed harmless on the surface, but cut deep once you thought about them. Once, while helping me fold laundry, she held up one of Mark's shirts and said, "He must look so handsome in this." She laughed, but her eyes lingered on the fabric in a way that made me want to snatch it back. Another time, she told me about a dream she had, where she and her friend's husband were dancing at a party. She brushed it off with a giggle, but I couldn't stop wondering if that friend was me. My chest felt tight whenever she was near him, and yet I still kept inviting her in. Still kept drinking coffee at my kitchen table with her. Still kept telling her things I should have kept private. It was like I was split in two. One part of me screaming to push her away, the other part desperate not to lose the only friend I thought I had here. And she knew it. She thrived on it. One evening, after the kids were asleep, she and I sat outside under the porch light. I confided in her that Mark and I hadn't been connecting, that I felt like we were slowly drifting. She reached over, touched my hand, and said softly, "Maybe he just needs someone to really listen to him." At the time, I thought she meant me. Later, I realized she was talking about herself. The more I replay it, the more I see how calculated it all was. She didn't just smile and make small talk. She studied us. Every weakness, every crack in our marriage, every insecurity I confessed, became something she could twist. I had nights where I sat in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was imagining things, if maybe I was paranoid. Mark kept insisting I was overthinking, that she was harmless, but deep down I felt a storm building. There was one evening that still haunts me. Mark and I had argued about bills. I was exhausted, angry, and after he stormed off to the garage, she appeared on my porch like she'd been waiting. She carried a plate of pie and that same rehearsed smile. I told her about the fight, foolishly pouring my heart out, and she leaned in, whispering, "Men like Mark, they need to feel appreciated, or else they start looking for it elsewhere." Those words sliced through me. She said it like a warning, but also like an invitation to distrust him. I remember gripping my mug so tightly I thought it would break. I couldn't decide if she was comforting me or mocking me. After that night, I began noticing her presence even more. She always seemed to know when we argued. Once, after a particularly bad fight, I caught her watching from her window, her curtains shifting as if she'd been standing there in the dark. Another time, when I tried to ignore her knocking, she slipped a note into my mailbox that read, "I'm here if you need someone." On the surface, it sounded supportive, but to me, it felt invasive, like she was reminding me she had access to my life whenever she wanted. The worst part was how she charmed the kids. They adored her, and she used that to her advantage. She'd show up with board games or treats, and I didn't want to be the mother who pushed away someone they liked. But when my daughter once said, "Miss Carla says she knows Daddy better than anyone," I froze. My daughter laughed like it was a silly joke, but inside I felt a sharp, cold fear. What had Carla been saying to them? What little seeds was she planting in their minds? I started watching my family unravel in front of me. Mark grew defensive, the kids grew confused, and all the while she smiled as if she was doing nothing at all. It was like she had crawled inside the walls of my home, listening, waiting, knowing exactly when to appear. I couldn't take a step without feeling her shadow stretching across my life. Sometimes I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being dramatic, but then little things kept proving me right. One night, after a long shift, Mark came home later than usual. I was already irritated, tired of feeling like we were strangers living under the same roof. When I confronted him, he swore he had stayed late at work. Nothing more. I wanted to believe him. Yet the very next morning, Carla showed up with coffee and, almost casually, asked if Mark had enjoyed his night out. I froze. She said it with such ease, like she knew something I didn't, and even though Mark denied everything, her words ate at me. How would she even know he was out unless she'd been watching? Or worse, unless she was with him. That was the moment the paranoia took root in me so deeply I couldn't shake it. I started checking his phone when he was in the shower. I started noticing how long he stayed outside after work, how quickly he brushed me off when I asked questions. Every answer he gave only seemed to confirm the doubt she had already planted, and I hated myself for letting her control me like that. The kids began to feel the tension too. They'd ask why Daddy was mad, or why Mommy cried at the kitchen when she thought no one was looking. And somehow Carla always had the right words ready for them. "Your parents just need space," she'd say. Sometimes grown-ups fight because they forget how much they love each other. It sounded kind, but I could feel the way it twisted things, making her the safe one, the trusted one, while I was the anxious, angry mother. One evening I caught her braiding my daughter's hair on the porch, humming softly while my little girl giggled. My chest tightened as if someone had stolen my place. I stood there frozen, smiling stiffly as if nothing was wrong, but inside I felt like screaming. That's when I realised she wasn't just trying to be my friend. She was positioning herself as part of my family, sliding into the spaces I was too tired or too broken to fill. And the most terrifying part was that it was working. There came a night when I could no longer tell if the cracks in my marriage were ours alone, or if she had pried them open with her careful hands. Mark and I were barely speaking. He spent more and more time at the garage, or running errands. And when he was home, he seemed distracted, distant, almost guilty. I wanted to believe it was stress from work, but in my gut, I felt her fingerprints all over it. Carla kept weaving herself into every conversation. At the grocery store, the cashier once joked that I had a twin, because Carla had been there just hours before buying the exact same things. She mirrored me, like she was practicing being me. Even the way she spoke began to shift. She used my phrases, my little expressions, even the tone I used with Mark. It was eerie, like watching a shadow become more solid than the original. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I noticed one of Mark's shirts smelled faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. When I mentioned it, he laughed nervously and said maybe it came from the office. But later that week, Carla hugged me tightly in front of the kids, and I caught the same scent clinging to her sweater. It was sweet, floral, and unmistakable. My throat tightened, but I forced a smile. I couldn't accuse her without proof, and Mark would only think I was paranoid again. Still, the puzzle pieces started forming a picture I didn't want to see. My son once mentioned that Miss Carla had picked him up from school because Daddy asked her to. I never asked Mark about it. Part of me was too afraid of the answer, but the thought of them coordinating behind my back made my skin crawl. She wasn't just destroying my trust. She was rewriting the roles in our family. And the worst part, she always did it with that same smile, soft and harmless, as if she were the hero stepping in to rescue us from ourselves. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every word, every glance between them. I wanted to scream, to throw her out of my house, to demand answers from Mark. But instead, I stayed silent, trapped in my own fear, letting her take inch after inch until I barely recognized the life I was living. The moment that broke something inside me wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, almost ordinary. I came home from the store one afternoon and found Carla sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, chatting with Mark like she'd always belonged there. My groceries slipped from my hands, rolling across the floor, and they both looked at me with the same startled expression. Mark quickly stood, saying she had just stopped by, but the way they both looked so comfortable, so familiar, told me this wasn't the first time. I felt like an intruder in my own home. I picked up the bags with shaking hands, trying to act normal, but every nerve in my body was on fire. Later, I asked Mark why she was there when I wasn't home, and he snapped at me, saying I was being paranoid. "She's a neighbour, not a criminal," he said, his voice sharp with irritation. But it wasn't just irritation, it was defensiveness. And defensiveness has a smell. It clings to the air, heavy and sour, and I could taste it that night. From that point on, I started noticing everything. The way his phone was always face down. The way he stepped outside to take calls. The way she would casually mention things only Mark and I had discussed in private. One evening, she teased me about the vacation plans I had only told Mark about 2 nights before. When I asked how she knew, she just smiled and said, "Oh, maybe he mentioned it." My heart dropped. I realised she had access to my marriage in ways I never gave her permission for. The children noticed too. My daughter asked me if Miss Carla was going to come on our trip, and I laughed nervously, brushing it off. But deep down I knew it wasn't funny. Carla had slipped into a role that belonged to me, and no one seemed to notice but me. The cruelest part was how she twisted kindness into control. She never yelled, never acted openly hostile. Instead, she killed me with soft words and gentle smiles, until even I questioned whether I was the crazy one. Nights became unbearable. I'd lie awake listening for whispers in the dark, waiting for the sound of Mark's phone buzzing, praying it wasn't her. My chest felt tight, like I was suffocating inside my own life. And yet, every morning she'd wave from her porch with that same smile. The smile that had once felt like welcome, but now felt like the grin of someone who already owned what was mine. It's strange how silence can feel louder than any argument. By then, Mark and I weren't fighting as much. We weren't really talking at all. The air in our house was heavy, filled with things unsaid, and Carla thrived in that silence. She slipped through it like water through cracks, filling every empty space we left between us. One evening, after the kids were asleep, I walked past the living room and saw the glow of Mark's phone lighting up his face. He didn't notice me, but I noticed the small curve of a smile on his lips. He hadn't smiled at me like that in months. I didn't need to see the name on the screen to know. My stomach sank, my heart pounded, and still I kept walking, too afraid of the confirmation. It's strange what fear does. It paralyses you. The next morning, Carla came over with muffins, acting like nothing had happened, but I saw the same smile on her face, the same curve I had seen on his. That was when the rage began to replace the fear. At first, it flickered like a candle, small but dangerous. I started keeping track of her visits, writing down the times she appeared, the excuses she gave. It became an obsession. I checked Mark's clothes for traces, sniffed the air when he walked in, scrolled through his phone when he showered. Every tiny clue felt like proof. Yet still I had nothing I could hold up and say, Here is the betrayal. Carla was too careful. She wrapped her steps in kindness, covered her tracks with neighbourly concern. To everyone else, she was the perfect friend, the helpful neighbour. To me, she was poison in sugar. The kids adored her more than ever. She picked them up from practice, baked cookies with them, even helped my son with a school project. They started running to her porch to tell her good news before they even told me. And each time her eyes would flicker toward me, just for a second, as if to say, "See, they're mine now too." I tried to talk to Mark one last time. I asked him straight if something was happening. He looked at me with a mix of exhaustion and irritation and said, "You're imagining things. You've let your jealousy ruin this family." His words cut deeper than anything Carla had done, because now it wasn't just her smile breaking me. It was his belief that I was the problem. That night, as I sat alone in the kitchen, I realised I had lost control of my own story. She had stolen it piece by piece, and I had let her. My fear, my silence, my need to keep peace. It had all given her the room she needed to destroy me from the inside. I don't think I'll ever forget the day I finally saw them together. Not as neighbours, not as friends, but as something more. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky feels like it's pressing down on you. I had gone out earlier than usual to pick up groceries, trying to distract myself from the constant storm inside my head. As I turned the corner back onto our street, I slowed down without even knowing why. And there they were, Mark's car parked outside Carla's house. The sight hit me so hard I had to pull over, my hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles went white. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe he had stopped by for something innocent. But then I saw them through the window. She was laughing at something he said, her hand brushing his arm like it belonged there. And the way he looked at her, it was a look I hadn't seen directed at me in years. My stomach turned, bile rising in my throat, and for a moment I thought I might throw up right there in the car. I wanted to burst through the door, to scream, to drag him out and make him face me. But I didn't. Instead, I sat frozen, soaked in a mix of rage and heartbreak, watching the pieces of my life crumble in front of me. When I finally went home, I couldn't even confront him. He walked in later that evening with the same excuse, working late, and I just nodded, my voice gone, my body shaking. Carla came by the next morning, all smiles, carrying a basket of fruit like she hadn't just been in my husband's arms. She asked how I was feeling, her tone dripping with false concern, and for the first time, I couldn't look at her. I turned away, my fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. I think she enjoyed my silence. She thrived on it. She leaned against the doorway like she owned the space, like she was daring me to speak. And the worst part, I didn't. That night, when Mark lay beside me pretending to sleep, I stared at the ceiling and realised something had shifted. The fear was gone. The doubt was gone. All that was left was clarity, sharp and merciless. She wasn't just destroying my family anymore. She had already done it. And if I didn't do something, she'd walk away with everything I had ever loved, smiling the whole time. The thing about betrayal is that it changes how you see the world. I used to believe in second chances, in forgiveness, in working through the cracks until something stronger could be built. But once you see your husband through another woman's window, laughing in a way he hasn't laughed with you in years, you realise there's no glue strong enough to put those pieces back together. I carried that image with me like a stone in my chest. It made every word he spoke sound hollow, every kiss feel like a lie. I began moving through the house like a stranger, cleaning rooms that no longer felt like mine, cooking dinners for a family that had already been stolen from me. The kids sensed it. My daughter asked me why I seemed sad all the time, and I told her I was just tired. She didn't believe me. Children know. They always know. Carla, of course, kept smiling. She came over with her usual gifts. Fresh bread, flowers from her yard, offers to help with anything I needed. To anyone else, she looked like a saint, but to me, every gesture was a taunt. I started to notice how she positioned herself when Mark was around. She'd lean closer than necessary, laugh louder than the joke required, brush imaginary lint from his sleeve, and he never stopped her. That was the part that gutted me the most. Not just her audacity, but his silence. He let it happen. He welcomed it. One night, I finally broke. After the kids went to bed, I asked him straight, "Are you in love with her?" He froze. He didn't deny it immediately, the way an innocent man would. He just sat there, staring at the floor. And in that silence, I had my answer. When he finally spoke, his words were weak, pathetic. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My hands shook, my vision blurred. But I held myself together because I refused to let him see me break. I went upstairs, locked the bathroom door, and cried silently into a towel until I thought I might drown in my own grief. The next morning, Carla waved from her porch like nothing had changed, like she hadn't just ripped the foundation of my life apart. That was when something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to compete. And I wasn't going to let her smile be the last word. If she wanted a war, she was going to get one. And this time, I wouldn't stay silent. When anger finally takes root, it's a different kind of fuel. It burns quietly at first, then roars until it consumes everything that once held you back. I woke up the day after his confession with a strange calm. The kind that comes only when you've already cried every tear you can cry. The house smelled of coffee. The kids were arguing over cereal, and Mark was pretending everything was normal, scrolling on his phone like a man who hadn't just admitted to destroying our marriage. I watched him for a long time, memorizing the curve of his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when he was nervous. And then I thought of her, the woman across the street who had worn her false smile like armor while she slid into every corner of my life. I decided that morning that I would not let her win. Not like this. I started small. I pulled back from her, stopped answering her knocks, stopped taking her offerings of food and flowers. When she waved from her porch, I turned away. I thought maybe indifference would shake her, but it only seemed to make her bolder. She showed up at the school one afternoon, offering to drive my kids home before I arrived. The teacher, not knowing the truth, allowed it. My children sat in her car laughing when I pulled up, and I nearly lost control of myself right there in the parking lot. She smiled at me through the windshield, that same smug curve of her lips, as if daring me to come closer. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached. That night, I laid everything out for Mark. I told him I knew, that I had seen them together, that the entire neighbourhood probably knew by now. He sat there silent, his face pale, and for once he didn't defend her. He didn't defend himself either. That silence told me more than words ever could. I realised then that I could waste years begging for answers I already had, or I could reclaim what was left of me, and so I began to plan. I didn't scream, didn't throw things, didn't collapse the way she probably hoped I would. Instead, I started gathering pieces. Bank statements, text messages, whispers from neighbours who had seen too much. Every smile she gave me became another brick in the wall I was building against her. Every late night of his became another entry in the record I was keeping. I wasn't just a broken wife anymore. I was a woman preparing for war. And the most dangerous kind of enemy is the one who has nothing left to lose. The day everything came to a head was almost painfully ordinary. The sun was out, kids riding their bikes down the street, sprinklers ticking in the background. I had reached the point where I couldn't carry the weight of secrets anymore. I wasn't going to let her keep smiling in my face while stabbing me in the back. I wasn't going to let Mark sit in silence, letting his guilt rot our house from the inside. So I chose that day, that moment, to end the performance. I invited a few neighbours over under the pretense of coffee on the porch. Carla showed up, of course, because she couldn't resist being in the centre of things. She wore her favourite sundress, the one she always wore when she wanted attention. Her lips painted in that shade of red that Mark once told me he liked. She smiled at me as if nothing had ever happened, as if she wasn't sleeping with my husband, as if she hadn't carved her claws into the heart of my family. I waited until everyone was seated, cups in hand, small talk buzzing in the air. Then, with my voice calm and steady, I laid it all out. I told them about the late nights, the lies, the perfume on his shirts. I told them about seeing them together, about the way she had slithered into my home, my marriage, my children's lives. And then I turned to her, looked her straight in the eye and said, "This woman destroyed my family while smiling at me like a friend." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Carla's smile faltered for the first time, and I saw the mask slip. Mark shifted uncomfortably, his face pale, but I didn't care anymore. This wasn't about saving him. This was about saving myself. She tried to laugh it off, to brush it away with her usual charm. But the neighbours didn't look at her the same anymore. The whispers had already begun, and now they had confirmation. Her power was gone. That evening, Mark packed a bag and left without a word. The kids cried, and my heart broke for them. But deep inside, I felt something I hadn't in months. Relief. For the first time, the silence in the house was mine, not hers, not his, mine. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt. It wasn't easy. There were nights I still cried into my pillow, mornings I had to force myself out of bed. But each day, the image of her smile lost its power. Each day I reminded myself that surviving betrayal is its own kind of victory. Carla still lives across the street, though she no longer waves. I don't need her smile anymore. I don't need her approval, her poison disguised as kindness. I have my children, my strength, and a heart that, though scarred, still beats with stubborn defiance. Sometimes I catch her watching from her window, but now it's me who smiles. Not out of kindness, not out of friendship, but out of the knowledge that she can no longer touch me. She destroyed my family, yes, but she didn't destroy me. And that, in the end, is the sweetest revenge I could ever give her.